whole family is looking around and nobody knows where their kid is. The fear on this mother's face was contagious. The entire family was borderline faint. After months of pursuing this man, they finally found him at... This video is sponsored by Simply Safe. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Home should feel like a safe and comfortable place. For me, keeping my home safe is all about protecting the people that I love most, my wife and my family. They mean everything to me, and ensuring their safety is my top priority. And that's why I went with Simply Safe. It's an all-encompassing security system for the entire home, with advanced sensors and cameras that detect break-ins to fires to floods, and even more. Simply Safe actually offers around-the-clock professional monitoring, and their agents are ready to take action to keep you protected by assessing the situation that they see happening, contacting you, and then contacting first responders. No matter what or when, somebody is there to help you. Simply Safe is an award-winning security solution. It was rated one of the best home security systems of 2024 by US News and World Report, and received the Best Customer Service Award in Home Security, awarded to them in 2024 by Newsweek. One of the standout features is Simply Safe's 24-hour live guard protection, and of course the smart alarm indoor camera. With live guard protection, Simply Safe's expert agents act within seconds of an alarm signal. Through the smart alarm indoor camera, the agents could speak to intruders in real time, stopping them in their tracks from whatever crime they're committing. With eyes on the scene, they can verify emergencies and use cutting-edge monitoring technologies to give you peace of mind that you're safe and protected. Save 20% on your security system when you sign up for the Fast Protect monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/YouTube. Customize your plan today. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Guys, I have something very exciting and new for you today. In today's video, I'm going to be telling 3 stories. 2 of them are going to be real and 1 of them is going to be fake. And it's your job in the comments to guess which ones are real and which one is fake. And I want you telling me your suspicions as I'm telling them in the comments. And I'm going to reveal at the end of the video which one was fabricated. And each one of these stories is going to get progressively more bizarre as I go. So make sure you're guessing as the video is going on and wait until the end to see if you were correct. The first person to guess the fake story in the comments will get a personal video reply from me. And don't bother trying to look up the names. We changed all the names from the real ones. So don't bother Google searching. You have to decipher which ones are real and which ones are fake by yourself. Enjoy the show. So in a small town in Pennsylvania, there was 2 families that were celebrating Thanksgiving together, the Dovers and the Birches. And this was a very unique holiday gathering because not only were the kids friends, but the parents were also really close friends. Both of the couples were like best friends. They brought their families together into a really tight family unit. So I'm going to give you guys a quick breakdown of the family members so you guys could actually follow the story. So please pay attention to this part. So there's the Dover family, which consists of parents Keller and Grace. The Dovers have a teenage son named Ralph and a young daughter named Anna. Then there's the Birch family, and that consisted of the father named Franklin, his wife Nancy, their teenage daughter Eliza, and their younger daughter Joy. And not only were these families super close and all of the parents and the kids were all best friends, they were also neighbors. They lived right in the same neighborhood. So these 2 families were constantly commingling. They lived just a couple doors down from each other. They would always spend holidays together, and it wasn't uncommon for them to hang out at each other's houses. Like, they had an open door policy for each other. And this wasn't a big Thanksgiving dinner, like one of those very formal ones where the entire extended family comes to eat. This was just a casual dinner with 2 families. It wasn't anything crazy. And after they finished eating, the parents just stayed in the dining room and were just chatting. You know how parents do, they just sit at the table and just talk for hours when the kids are just like, I just want to go in the other room and play and watch a movie. So the parents allowed the kids to leave the dinner table and go and play in the living room and watch a movie together. So after a couple hours and the parents were finished talking, they were ready to start kind of wrapping up and bring their kids home because it's getting close to bedtime. Keller, who is the father of the Dover family, went into the living room to kind of tell the kids to start packing up their stuff to head home. But when he walked into the living room to announce to all of the kids that, hey, we're going to get ready to leave, he only saw Ralph and Eliza on the couch, the 2 older children. And he's looking around the living room, he's looking in closets, he's looking in the bathroom, the spare bedroom, just to see if Anna and Joy are anywhere, and he can't find these 2 young girls anywhere. And immediately the dad turns his attention to his oldest son. It's like, hey, where's your younger sister? Where is he? You're just not paying attention to where your younger sister is? But Ralph was kind of like a teenage kid, and he's just like, they're just playing somewhere nearby. we're just watching a movie. They just wanted to go play dolls or something. Like, I'm not gonna chase this girl around while I'm relaxing after a Thanksgiving dinner. But then when Keller opens the front door and is looking outside, going and looking even further around the house into the backyard, just in the general vicinity, and he can't find his daughter, he starts freaking out a little bit. He starts getting a little bit anxious. So he storms back into his friend's house, back into where the parents are still talking, and he alerts the rest of them like, hey, I don't know where Anna and Joy are. They're not anywhere. And initially the parents just come together. They're trying to stay calm because they want to be rational. They don't want to jump to conclusions. And they come to the decision together that they probably went back to the other house just right down the block to their friend's house. They probably went back there because they forgot a toy or something. They're probably just back at our house. But Keller can't wait a second. He beelines back to his house because he needs to find his daughter. It's not even safe for young girls like that to be playing in a house by themselves anyway. So when he gets there, he searches that house, he's yelling for her, and they're nowhere to be found there either. And once they find out that they're not at the second house, and they still haven't showed up at the first house, now everybody's outside, everybody's calling their name, they're freaking out. People are looking out their windows and out their doors. It's Thanksgiving afternoon. And after he's frantically looking around and there's no sign of them, the only source of information that he could think of is to go back to his teenage son, because he knows that he was with those young girls just a little bit earlier. So he starts pressing his son even more, just telling him, berating him, trying to get more details out of him. And that's when Ralph, his son, mentions he just digs into his mind because his dad is basically shaking him, trying to get information out of him. And he's like, Dad, I think there was an RV parked a couple houses down. That's the only thing that looked out of the ordinary today. But there's a bunch of other cars on this block because people are visiting people for Thanksgiving. You guys know how it is on holidays when the block gets packed with cars on holidays. But Ralph just thought that RV stuck out a little bit to me. And it's the only piece of information that he was able to give his dad. And the reason it stuck out to him a little bit was because the two girls were like climbing up the ladder on the back of the RV and playing on the RV because it was kind of unique and old. And he scolded his young sister like, hey, get off that. That's not yours. So he remembered that instance happening where his sister was interested in this RV. So if she went back outside, maybe she would go back to that RV. At this point, these girls are nowhere to be found. They're not at any of their neighbors' houses. They've been freaking out for like 10 minutes. It's time to call the police. They decide to file missing persons reports right then and there. Naturally, the parents, both of the parents, are absolutely freaking out. And when the police finally arrive, they could barely console themselves. They're begging these police officers to find their daughters. The detective at the scene that showed up, super calm, was just trying to keep composed, get as much information as he possibly could. But his demeanor was a little bit too calm for Keller. There was a little bit of tension right there immediately because he's like, dude, my daughter's missing and you're acting like it's not that big of a deal. But the detective stood his ground. He's like, I need to stay calm because I have 48 hours to find your daughter before the odds of finding her drop significantly. So tell me as much information as you possibly can and I will find your daughter. And naturally, as they're giving this detective all of the details that they possibly can, the RV sticks out to him. He goes, that is probably our best bet. We have to track down that RV. Tell me what it looked like, if you remember any license plate, any description. And he put all the police in the area on the lookout for this specific RV. And it didn't take that long. You know, in a small town, when two young girls go missing, when people hear about it, they're like, I'll look out for that. We don't like that around here. When you're from a small town, you know what that community feels like. And two young innocent girls go missing, the whole community's after you. So it didn't take long until they're like, yeah, we see that RV. It pulled into a gas station. It's right here. You guys need to pull up right now. And when the police pull up to the gas station that they got the anonymous tip from, it's a gas station that's right next to like a forest preserve. And already this scene is a little bit weird. They pull into this gas station and this guy is parked right up against these woods in an RV at a random gas station on Thanksgiving. Already you're getting weird vibes from it. And the police just completely surround him because they think we probably just found the culprit here. When the police initially went into the RV to search for these girls or search for this culprit, there was nobody in the RV. The detective was going through there and obviously has his flashlight. It's not super bright in there. He's not seeing anybody. He's kind of looking at the cabinets, a little bit weird. They're kind of big cabinets, but not worth opening because there's no sounds of anybody. You can't really store an adult and two kids in here. So they just decide, let's go back outside and let's stake it out and wait for somebody to come back to this RV. So the police are waiting outside of this RV for a little bit, and then finally they're looking in through the back window, and then they see movement in the RV without anybody going into the RV. So you could only assume the detective was probably right about his assumption. He was hiding where he thought he was hiding, and now he left that hiding space, and this dude immediately goes into the driver's seat, tries to get away, and crashes directly into a tree. in pure panic. Immediately, the cops swarm on this RV. They get this guy arrested. He's a weaselly little weird looking guy, long blonde hair, glasses, kind of nerdy. He's an odd looking gentleman, but they don't have nearly enough evidence on him as they need to make like a real arrest and keep him in custody because the girls weren't there. They just found him and like, yeah, he's creepy. He's in this RV that matches the description, but there's no evidence here. So the detective kind of has to pivot a little bit because they have this guy, but the guy's not with the girls. So he starts to get a list. He asks for a list of all of the offenders in the area to see if maybe there's some overlap here. And while this RV guy is just in custody and going through the questioning, the detective is like, I'm trying to make the most out of my time. So I'm going to take this list of offenders and I'm going to go visit all of these offenders in the area one by one. And most of them just kind of seem to be minding their own business, weren't into trouble recently. But finally he gets to one offender that seems a little bit fishy. The detective pulls up to where a priest lives. It's like a home/church, and he goes, and there was some recent allegations on this priest, so he's a likely suspect for this case. He has to go check him out. When the detective gets to the door and knocks on the door, there's initially no response, but he takes the liberty, and you have to give him props for it. I know it's a little bit illegal, but when two little girls are missing, sometimes you got to take a little bit of liberty when the door is a little bit of a crack open and you're going to go do a welfare check on the local offender. So he lets himself in, and he's noticing beer bottles and alcohol bottles all over the floor. There's no response. There's no sign of anybody anywhere until he finds the priest pretty much passed out drunk in his house, and he's like, well, he couldn't have done it. But then he also takes the liberty to continue checking his house just in case, because maybe he did it as he was a little bit buzzed. Maybe he has them here. Maybe the girls are somewhere in this house. He just has to check all of his bases, then he's gonna leave. So as the detective is searching this priest's house, he's checking all the nooks and crannies. He knows what to look for, and he notices a false door. I think it was attached to like the refrigerator, and he pulls the refrigerator open, and it's a full staircase down to a hidden basement crawl space. And when the detective makes his way down there, he's feeling that he might be walking into something gruesome. He doesn't have a good feeling about what's at the bottom of these stairs. He's worried that he might be walking in on where these two girls ended up. But when he gets down there, he gets a bit of a different surprise because he sees the corpse, if not only like the bones and skeletons of what looks like a grown man tied to a chair in this priest's basement. Immediately, when he finds a dead body in this guy's basement, he goes right back upstairs, weapon drawn, wakes this drunk dude up, drags him down all the way down these stairs, and basically rubs his face in it like when a dog poos in the basement. You'll be like, what is this? What is this guy in your basement? And as he's threatening this priest to tell him who is this man tied to this chair in your basement, the priest starts confessing. He starts confessing to this detective, look, I was just doing God's work. This guy had came to my church and confessed to me that he had killed dozens of children to wage a war on God. And this priest felt like he had to take this guy out because he believed him. He believed that this guy killed multiple children. The detective is trying to take in all of this information that this priest is giving him while he's trying to examine this skeleton. And he noticed there's like this pendant around the neck of this skeleton, and it looks like a circle that has an engraving of a maze on it, just like a maze pendant. So in this situation, the detective had a hard decision to make. He has this 48 hours to find this girl. He did just come across a dead body in this man's basement, but the priest is saying, this was a really bad dude, and he has all of the proof against this priest. Like, he could come back and arrest him whenever he wants, but he only has 48 hours to find these girls. So he's like, I have to make a choice here. I'm just going to come back. And he actually just leaves the priest there for a little bit, leaves this body in the basement, takes the necklace with him because he felt like that was a little bit important. But he's like, I just got to keep looking for these girls. I don't know if that's a good decision. Let me know if you think that's a good decision. So after the detective makes that decision to leave the priest there, he heads back to the station because he's like, now I only have one suspect. It's Alex. It's the dude from the RV that was a little bit weird. I got to go back there and I got to interrogate him. And he gets back there and he starts ripping into him a little bit, really trying some intimidation tactics, not physical abuse, but he's getting up in his grill, asking him some hard questions. But he quickly realized, as does the rest of the team, that Alex is borderline a child. His IQ isn't 1 point above 10. He's literally like a kindergartner in an adult's body, extremely underdeveloped and almost harmless. It became almost impossible to believe that he was the one that had abducted these children because he was basically a child. It wasn't an act. It wasn't anything like that. This man was incapable of critical thinking. He was incapable of really hard planning, and he didn't seem that cruel in general. And on top of that, they had just arrested him because they said that there was an RV out front, but there was no evidence of the girls ever being in the RV. So after they find out that he's got an IQ of 10 and there's no evidence in his RV, they have to let this kid go. This guy is literally not mentally equipped for this, and this has been a traumatic situation for him in general. They just let this guy leave. And obviously, like I said, it's a pretty small town. Everybody got wind of this case. Everybody knew that Anna and Joey were missing. So when he got released, all these reporters are out front. Like, people want answers, and they see them releasing this guy, the only suspect that they have. But Alex had an aunt named Holly, and Holly came to the station to pick him up. So once he got released, Holly was rushing Alex to the car. Don't take any questions. This is my mentally not equipped nephew. You guys aren't barraging him with all of these media questions after they were just interrogating him for hours. She's trying to protect Alex. She just tries to get him into the car. But before Holly was able to get Alex into the car, Keller Dover, the dad of one of the young girls, was out there too. He wanted some answers, and he was like, I'm out here. I see Alex. I'm going to plead with him to just beg him if he has any information. And he just barrels through the crowd, gets a hold of Alex, and is like, dude, just tell me anything. Tell me where my daughter is if you know anything. And among all of this buzz with all of these media things, he's face to face with Alex. Nobody else could hear him. They're in whispering distance. And Alex replies to Keller, they only cried when I left them. And at that moment, Keller knew. This guy did something with my daughters. They only cried when I left them. He knows something. He said something cryptic. He whispered it to me around all these people to mess with me. That took him to a different level of rage, and he started to get violent with him. Which, of course, because this guy was just let free, caused Keller to be detained by police. And when he's relaying to the detectives and the police officers, yo, this guy said that they only cried when he left them. He took my daughter and my best friend's daughter and left them somewhere. Please believe me. They didn't really believe him because they felt like that dude was super low IQ and you're super distressed. You're basically hearing things like, this isn't adding up from what we got from him. It just seems like you're trying to give us one false statement for us to get him back into custody because you're super stressed out about this. And Keller's freaking out because he heard that. Alex said that to him, but the police officers are just ensuring him that they're doing everything that they could possibly do to find his daughter, and they're basically just brushing him off like, Alex gets to go home, you should go home, let us do our job. But Keller is not cool with that answer. Neither would I be. Neither would you be. Let me know. Would you be cool if someone was like, go home, your daughter's missing, let us do our job? When that dude whispered to you, they only cried when I left them? No, I'm doing what Keller did. And what Keller did was he stalked him. He went to his house, and he was hiding in his car, hiding in the bushes, learning his patterns, stalking this dude for any hint to find out where his daughter was, as he should. And Keller's outside of Alex's house the next night. He's just staring into these windows. He's trying to figure out anything that he can. And he's out there, and Alex comes out to walk his Aunt Holly's dog. And at this point, Keller has gotten no sign that he's done anything wrong. He's gotten no sign where his daughter is or that this guy is physically violent in any way. But as he's coming and walking the dog, once he gets like a quarter of the way down the block, he lets his first little violent streak out. And he has this dog on the leash, and he just picks it up, and he's just holding the dog up by his collar for 10 seconds when nobody's watching. He just did it for himself. He was just walking this dog and just picked it up just to torture it and hurt it a little bit and then put it back down. And Keller's looking at him and was like, that was weird. I don't like that. Who likes a dog abuser? No one. That's weird psychotic behavior. And he's like, that's a little sign. It is you. I know it's you. And then as Alex is walking the dog back to the house, he's humming a song. And the song that he's humming is the song that Keller's daughter sings every day. And at that point, he is 100% convinced this dude took my daughter. The police don't believe me. I'm getting this guy. And at this point, that father made a decision. He made the decision that he is taking this into his own hands. He's getting his daughter back. He kept stalking Alex. He waited for the right time, and he kidnapped him. He took him. He brought him to an abandoned apartment building that he was working on for his construction company, but he knew was abandoned and nobody was in there and nobody was working on it. And he handcuffed him to a sink and gave him the business. And for the first couple hours, Keller gave it to him himself. He was trying to get some answers out of him, white knuckling it. And eventually, when Alex wasn't talking, he went and found Franklin, the father of the other girl that's missing. So he's like, Franklin, I got something for you. You got to come see this. We're two fathers in a predicament together. We're in this together. I need you to go see what I just found. And he brings Franklin to that apartment building, and initially Franklin's like, dude, you can't be kidnapping people. That kid is beat up right now. But then he's looking at this kid, and Keller's like, he said that they only cried when he left them. I saw him torturing a dog, and I heard him humming Anna's favorite song. And Franklin flipped the switch for a little bit. He's a father too. He got his licks in, but Alex wasn't giving them anything. He's not giving them any new information. And these two distressed dads are just whooping this low IQ kid's ass for hours and hours, getting nowhere. And when I say they're not getting anywhere with torturing this kid, I mean it. He's not saying a thing to them, and they're whooping him. They just keep whooping him to the point where Franklin is actually getting a little heavy-hearted about it. He has to tell his wife. So Franklin tells his wife Nancy that they have him, and he brings Nancy to this apartment building. And initially Keller's like, dude, I told you no wives. We had to figure this out. She's gonna tell me that this is bad. She's gonna report this. But Nancy kind of pulls up and she's like, I'm not mad about this. She's like, I'm kind of happy you have him here, but let's take a different approach. You guys are really scaring him. Maybe he'll answer me. Maybe the softer tone of a woman coming in, maybe he'll fess up a little bit. So give me a try. Let's stop punching his face in. Maybe let me sweet talk him a little bit. But as she's sweet talking him, he just kind of says like, can you untie me? Like, I'm really uncomfortable. So she lets him go. Both the dads are right there. It's not like she's doing it by herself, but she lets his hand go. He immediately breaks the mirror, gets a large piece of glass. So he has a weapon now. He's going after Nancy. The two dads take him out again quickly. But now Keller knows, I need to figure out something else for this kid. He's not budging at all, and now he's actually actively fighting back. I need to figure out something that just contains him properly. So he decides to build this small wooden cage around the shower that's in the bathroom where they were keeping him, and he just shoves this kid in the shower and just locks it. Keller had to change his game plan with him because obviously the fisticuffs were not working. So once he put him in this shower cage, he let Alex know, hey, this water doesn't regulate itself. This is either ice cold or boiling hot. And he just kept alternating, and he would just go ice cold, leave for 2 hours, and leave the windows open in winter. Then he'd come back. Alex is probably sleeping in there. He's in pitch black dark. He doesn't hear a thing. Keller would sneak back in, just rip on the boiling water. There was just this small little gap, and he'd whisper in, tell me where my daughter is. And this all stops. Just tell me where she's at. And he's just alternating ice cold, boiling hot. But Alex is still not budging. But Keller is not letting up. And he's just like, dude, I will literally do this until you die. Like, this is my daughter. Tell me what I want to know. And he just ripped on the boiling water. It was like, I'm not turning it off till you tell me. But the only thing that Alex said was, I'm not Alex. That's all he could get out. Keller's like, I know you're Alex. And he's at this point, he's like, I literally don't know what to do with this kid. He's going to die. And if he dies, I have no leads. So at the same time that Keller's doing that to Alex, there's a vigil going on outside of the girl's house. Just the entire community coming together to give support to the family for these lost girls. There's candles, flowers, stuffed animals, just the whole community there just trying to help this grieving family. They're kind of to the point now where they don't think these girls are coming back. So they're doing the vigil, they're doing all this, but the detective is there and he's still looking around because when something happens like this, it's not uncommon for the person that committed this crime to come back and relish in his work. So he's there and he's looking around this crowd. Obviously he's really upset. He's feeling the weight of this whole community grieving these girls. But then he sees one guy that just looks a little bit out of place to him. And this guy slips his way through the crowd. He's wearing a black hoodie completely covering his head. And he just goes up and he puts a little stuffed animal right on this vigil, gives it a little caress, but a little bit weird, and then starts to make his way out. And the detective is like, I did not like the look of that. So he starts circling the crowd, looking at this guy, but the guy kind of sees the detective is looking at him and they make a little bit of eye contact. The detective gets a little glimpse of his face. He could see what this guy looks like and he doesn't like the look of him. So he gets out of this crowd and the detective starts kind of just walking behind him, but this guy's not stopping. And the detective is like, hey, stop. Let me talk to you. This guy's not stopping. He's picking up the pace. Now the detective is like, hey, I need you to stop. And this dude takes off running. So the detective beelines after him. They're jumping through yards, fence over fence, just weaving through this neighborhood until this guy actually loses this detective. The detective doesn't find him, but the detective did remember what his side profile looked like and enough to make a composite of his face. So the next day after this chase, the detective is like, I got somebody. There is a suspect. We don't know where he is yet, but we're just kind of waiting on another lead until we find this guy. But now they're aware that Alex is nowhere to be found either. So Alex is missing. He's aware of that. And then they get a call from Grace Dover, Keller's wife, that she thinks that somebody broke into her house. And the detective shows up to the house, and Grace, obviously Grace is a mess. Her daughter has been missing. She's freaking out, but she's even more of a mess than you would expect because she was already kind of dealing with a prescription drug issue, and it has just enhanced quite a bit since the daughter's been missing. It's the first thing the detective notices. He's like, damn, there's a lot of pill bottles around here. She's clearly out of it. She's paranoid. She's already dealing with her daughter being missing, and now she hasn't left the house for days. She's hearing stuff upstairs, and he immediately goes, hey, where's Keller? Why isn't Keller here consoling you? Why are you by yourself? And she's like, I thought Keller was out with you looking into this case, because whenever I see him, he's like, I'm with the cops doing detective work, helping them find our daughter. So then the detective goes, what is Keller doing? He hasn't been with us. He tells Grace, like, I haven't seen Keller in days. Alex is missing. The girls are missing. Maybe the dad did it. Maybe Keller. Because usually when a kid goes missing, isn't it like 80% of the time it's the dad that did it? So then he gets suspicious of Keller. So now there's so much tension between Grace and Keller, Keller and the detective and Keller. There's so much suspicion going on, and there's no real suspect because Alex is gone. And then he doesn't know who the guy at the vigil was, but then they get a really good break in the case. They get another tip that the guy that he saw at the vigil, that he got the composite sketch of, was shopping at a children's store, and it was a pretty good match. So they actually had a real lead now, and his name was Bob Taylor. Right away, they get all the information that they need on Bob Taylor. They beeline to his house. They got his address, they got all this. They pull up to his house, and they're ready to make an arrest right when they get there. When the police showed up at Bob Taylor's house, the detective was already ready to make this arrest, and he was just expecting this guy to deny it and just kind of be like, hands off, like, you have no proof, all this. Bob Taylor answers the door, and this dude is weird. He is bizarre. He's acting weird. He's talking in riddles, and the detective is like, oh my God, this guy did it. This guy has to be the guy that did it. He is a literal freak. So the detective basically just kicks down this door. Realistically, he just bulldozed it. He dropped a shoulder, popped this door open, got Bob Taylor on his back, started making the arrest, because he knew sometimes when you just hear somebody speak, you're like, there's something off with you. And after he makes the arrest, he's got him fully locked up. He starts looking through this guy's house. There's barely any furniture in it, and there's just mazes all over the walls, maze books, all this bizarre maze artwork. And then right away, the detective goes, that locket that was on that skeleton in the priest's basement, what is with this maze? And he's making a connection with that skeleton and Bob Taylor now, but he doesn't really know what the connection is. So the detective is walking around this guy's house, and he's like, what is happening here? But he goes into one of the rooms, and then he sees these chests. They're like locked treasure chests, and he pops one open, and inside of this treasure chest, in this pretty much furnitureless apartment, this treasure chest is filled with children's clothes covered in blood, and under the children's clothes is a snake. So safe to say, Bob Taylor is doing some weird stuff, and they got the right guy. So they get Bob Taylor into interrogation, and almost right away, he's like, I did it. It was me, confesses to everything, but he won't say where the girls are. He just says like, yup, you caught me. So they have this guy in interrogation, and the detective is just getting really frustrated with him because we got a confession, but we didn't get the information that we wanted. We want to give these families closure. We want to know where these girls are if they're still alive. But Bob Taylor's just in this room drawing mazes, talking in riddles, not giving any real information. And like I said before, the detective's interrogation style, he would get up in your grill. He'd get intimidating. He'd get really close to you. He's trying to really let you know that he's here and he's looking for information. So he tried this tactic with Bob Taylor. Fortunately, he was so emotionally caught up in this interrogation, he didn't realize that his holster was right there. And Bob Taylor grabbed the item in his holster and used it on himself, and he eliminated himself from the interrogation process. So now the main suspect that they had that fully confessed is deceased, and they don't have any of the other information to close this case other than this deceased man that confessed. So jumping back to where Keller's at, he's obviously still torturing Alex because it's his only lead. But during his process of torturing Alex, he starts to feel a little bit guilty because he isn't positive at this point. So in a way to almost get forgiveness to himself, he goes to Alex's aunt's house just to treat her nice because he feels bad that she's collateral damage in everything that's going on because he does think Alex did it. So he's just there trying to console his aunt, who thinks Alex is just missing. So he's pretending to be a nice guy even though he's the reason that Alex is missing. And while he's there, he is there to try to console the aunt, but he's also there to look for clues. But when he wasn't really able to find any, he just headed out because he has other stuff to do. He has stuff to do with Alex. So he's headed back to Alex, which that apartment building is right next to a liquor store. But at this point, the detective doesn't have a lead with Bob anymore. So the detective's number one lead is Keller. So now the detective is following Keller. Keller kind of notices. So when he pulls into the liquor store, this man has been sober for pretty sure it was 10 plus years. He could see the detective in his rear view, and he just pulled up to this apartment building, but he goes into the liquor store. But the detective isn't fooled whatsoever, and he confronts him. He's like, dude, I know you don't drink. What are you doing here? I followed you a couple times. Why do you keep going to this apartment building? What are you hiding? And Keller is like, he's hiding Alex in there. But he's like, I can't show him that I'm hiding Alex in here. Just come. I'm a construction worker. Come in. They go into this apartment building, and there's a huge tension between them. He thinks that this detective is about to find this horribly beaten and tortured Alex. But then bigger news breaks. They get word while they're at this apartment complex where Alex is locked up that Joy, the Birch's youngest daughter that was abducted along with Anna, was found and is now in the hospital recovering. So they freak out and they immediately leave this apartment building and beeline to the hospital. And this poor girl was clearly drugged and was unable to share any details about where she was or what happened. She was completely out of it and she just needed to recover. But when Keller showed up to this hospital, he wasn't ready to get no answers from Joy. So against everybody's wishes, he kind of starts interrogating Joy a little bit. And he's like, do you remember anything? Tell me any detail. Tell me anything you remember about where you are. He's pressing this poor young girl at the hospital because he's a freaking out father. And if she's alive, his daughter might be alive. So you have to resonate with him a little bit, but he's not doing the right thing by pressing this little girl. But he does get a little bit of information out of Joy. Joy says, you were there in front of everybody, which is a very loaded statement because that can apply. You have been there and you know where it is, so you just have to backtrack and you'll find Anna. Or you were there, like you did it, and now you're trying to cover your bases in front of everybody else and intimidate this young girl in front of detectives and parents, and it's you. And what didn't help the situation is that Keller put 2 and 2 together in his head about where they are, and he sprints out of the hospital, not telling anybody else the conclusion that he came to before he leaves, because he kind of knows that he doesn't look great here and they're not going to let him go to where he needs to go in time. So he just has to run, go find his daughter, but he looks like a bad guy in that moment. And like I said, it's suspicious. So the detective starts running after Keller. He's like, I think it's Keller. You were there. She just said you were there. I'm following you, dude. I think it's you. I'm going to track you down. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So now they're both headed in the same direction. Keller got a big head start on everybody else, though. The detective kind of knew where he was going. At least he had assumptions, but Keller knew exactly where he was going. Keller was going back to the aunt's house. He was going back to where he was stalking Alex from, because that's the only place that he possibly could have been there. He just, for some reason, assumed that there was no way that the aunt was in on it because she was just a sweet old lady. And there was no way that they would just have kids hidden in their house. Why wouldn't the detectives look in the house? The detectives even said that they did look in the house, like they cleared this house. But he knew that must be the only place that I was there. I was in that house. So when Joy said, you were there, they must have heard his voice. They must have just kind of known that Keller was there. So it was the only place that he could think to go to, because the only other place he was going to was the apartment to whoop on Alex. But when Keller gets to Holly's house to confront her and look for his daughter, he basically just busts in the front door and he's looking around, he's searching. Immediately, he gets a shot fired at his head, and immediately Holly's holding him at gunpoint. And you find out that Holly is the culprit here. Holly is a sadistic woman. Holly's husband was the man that the detective found in the priest's basement. Holly's husband wasn't lying about those kids that he killed. He just didn't mention that his wife was in on it. And they waged a war on God because they thought that God took their kid away, because unfortunately one of their young children died. So they started taking it out on everybody else's children. And over the course of decades, they were kidnapping, drugging, and just keeping kids that weren't theirs because they were so hurt from losing their child. So they would abduct these kids, they'd give them a 2-liter bottle that's like a cocktail of chemicals and drugs, and they would keep them in a room and they would just give them scrapbooks of mazes, and they'd say you could leave if you can escape the maze. And you find out that Alex and Bob Taylor were not Alex and were not Bob Taylor. They were both two kids that were abducted over 10 years ago and raised by Holly and her husband, and were just abused and abducted, fed these 2-liter bottles. That's why Alex was low IQ. He was being fed drugs since he was 10 years old. He was a victim of Holly and her husband. And Keller just arrived in the spider's den, and Holly is holding him at gunpoint. But Keller doesn't have a weapon with him, so he has to listen to Holly. And Holly makes him go hide in a big ditch that they have a nice soundproof cover for out in their yard. So that's probably where they were hiding the kids when the police were searching their house. And now she has Keller just in there. Nobody could hear him, but then the detective shows up because the detective put the dots together. He's like, he must have went here. This is just what Keller must have assumed. And he shows up, finds Anna in this house. She's not in the best shape, but she's alive. And while he's trying to save her, Holly tries to take him out from behind as well, but she misses by a little bit. The detective draws his weapon, takes Holly out, and ends this for good. He saves Anna, but nobody knows where Keller is. So the detective has to leave Holly's house. He doesn't know where Keller is, but a couple days later, they go back to excavate their yard to see if there's any bones or remains of these other kids to give closure to these other families that Holly and her husband tormented. And as he's leaving, he's the last one leaving the scene, he hears the faintest whistle, and he finds Keller ripping into a whistle, his daughter's whistle, that was in that ditch. So on a summer day in Louisiana, there was this big family that wanted to get together and go have a barbecue down kind of near the bayou, near the swamp. It was a very wooded area. Some would call it a lake, some would call it a pond. Realistically, this place was a swamp. The family had a cabin there, so their plan was to go to their cabin, have all of their extended family come, 11 plus members, have a big old barbecue, probably some crawfish, probably some catfish, the whole Cajun style large family get together. And whenever they go to this lake house, they just have the best time. It's a lot of parents and a lot of extended family of kids. It just has that summer feel to it where your entire family gets together, all of your cousins, aunties, uncles. They're just having a great time on this swamp. So the people that own the house were named the Dunbars. And as the entire party was going absolutely fantastic, Mr. Dunbar had to go work a little bit. I know it sucks sometimes when the entire family's together, everybody's having a good time, but sometimes daddy needs to go to work. Daddy needs to pay these bills. So he took a little hiatus from the party and went to go get some deals done. But his son, Bobby, was not very happy about this. He loved spending time with his dad and around his extended family. So Bobby started throwing a little bit of a tantrum. Mind you, Bobby was only 4 years old, so when daddy leaves the party, sometimes the 4-year-old loses his temper. Naturally, they calmed down Bobby. It's not that hard to calm down a 4-year-old. The mom just started making his favorite food. He started playing with his cousins again. Everything was good for a little while. But as Mr. Dunbar was out working, something happened. Something horrible happened. When he came back, he came to find his entire family in absolute distress, completely freaking out. His wife fainted because of what happened and what was going on currently. Everybody was an absolute mess, and the one thing that he couldn't find was his son. He's going around asking everybody where his kid is, and he doesn't realize why they're freaking out in the first place. Finally, a family member breaks it to him and just says, "We can't find Bobby. We can't find your son." Now he is in absolute parent mode, looking for his son everywhere, but there is no sign of him whatsoever. So the entire family is scouring this area for this kid, any sign of this kid, but they're not even getting the faintest clue of where he possibly could have went. And obviously some of them are thinking he threw a little bit of a tantrum, maybe he ran off, but how far could this 4-year-old run? They can't find him anywhere. And after about 20-30 minutes, you stop looking just by yourself. It's time to call the police. You can't find a kid. It's time to call the authorities and block off some mile radius to see if anybody's leaving with your kid. When the police arrived to the scene, which was very quick, they were very alert with it, they were trying to find this kid, they realized pretty quickly that he wasn't in the general area, or at least he wasn't above ground in the general area, so they had to go ahead and call the state police. So now this became an entire statewide search just in case somebody was trying to flee the state with this kid. So as the state police is closing off highways and trying to search cars, putting out the word that there's a kid missing, the local police takes it upon themselves to start looking in the water, because this lake, which was realistically a swamp, realistically had a lot of alligators in it. This wasn't a safe place for kids that are playing by the edge of the water. So the police have to go ahead and start catching alligators and even dissecting them to see if there's any human remains or any evidence of Bobby in these alligators. They even go to the point of throwing dynamite in the water to see if it'll shake up his body and float to the top. When they found nothing with the dissections and they found nothing with the dynamite, they sent divers into the water at night just to see if he was hooked onto something or if just anything was down there, any sign of him. and they didn't find anything either. There was absolutely no trace of Bobby Dunbar anywhere in the vicinity. This kid disappeared into thin air. So as the days pass and nobody has any sign of Bobby, the community starts coming together. Everybody's searching for this kid for an extended period of time, to the point where the family was like, hey, anybody that finds this kid, we'll give you $1,000, no strings attached. You bring us our son back, you get $1,000, which is equivalent to about $22,000 today. So this was a large reward, and everybody was searching for this kid because that's not a small amount of money. Plus, it's a kid missing, so everybody's searching for him in general. And even after weeks and weeks of investigating and searching for this kid, and the police giving out hundreds, if not thousands of copies of this kid's face on posters, nobody has seen him anywhere. This case is basically cold. But then a miracle hits the police department. They get a tip that somebody has found him 8 months after his disappearance. They got a tip that there was a young boy matching Bobby's description down in Mississippi. If you're not familiar with geography, Mississippi is right next door to Louisiana, so it's not unbelievable to think that somebody grabbed Bobby at this swamp in Louisiana and drove him across state lines and is now just living in Mississippi with this kid openly. So the tip that the police got was basically that there was this traveling handyman that worked primarily on pianos, just fixing pianos on the road, was traveling with this young boy, and he matched the description of Bobby Dunbar. So the police are like, if this guy's a traveling handyman, he's moving around constantly, that kind of makes sense why we haven't been able to track him down. This is a good lead. People say he looks like him. Let's go find this guy. Let's talk to him. So when they finally track him down, the man's name is William Walters. William Walters, the man, said that the kid that was traveling with him was named Bruce Anderson. And I know what you're thinking. What is the relationship here? Why is this grown man traveling with what would now be a 5-year-old of a different last name? It just seemed a little bit fishy to the police, and William Walters wasn't super nice about it. He wasn't super happy about having to explain himself why he has this kid with him. He wasn't exactly cooperative. So the police right away go, that's a red flag. He matches the description. This guy's being kind of rude. It doesn't really make sense why he has this kid, because they're not directly related, and he's just a traveling handyman. Why do you have a 5-year-old with you? Obviously, the police continues to press William Walters because they're not liking his answers up to this point, and he starts to feel the pressure. So he's like, I need to give them a little bit more information. So he goes ahead and says that this kid is the illegitimate son to a woman that works for my family, and I take care of him. The police are still very skeptical of this, so they ask him to continue. Keep coughing up that information, William Wallace. It's not looking good for you. So William has to defend himself, and he says, the mother of this child told me I can take care of him. I have permission to have this kid in my custody. You can ask her. I realized that I just said William Wallace. I meant William Walters. Don't beat me up in the comments. Mind you, at this point, the police are not even slightly believing William. They're like, okay, dude. Yeah, this 5-year-old that matches this description of this lost kid perfectly to the T. This might as well be the kid's twin, is the illegitimate son of somebody that works for your family, and she said that you could have him. Yeah, that really adds up. They are not believing him thus far. So this interrogation goes on for quite a bit. They have William in custody, and he's just pleading his case because he realizes the jail cell's coming his way pretty soon unless he could convince these guys, and he's just saying the same thing. This is not Bobby. His name is Bruce. This child is named Bruce. He is not Bobby Dunbar, I promise. And the police were like, yeah, okay, bud, go ahead and turn around, throw the cuffs on him, and they convict him of kidnapping Bobby, and they're just like, this kid is Bobby. We know it for sure. Get in that jail cell. So this is where this case starts to get super weird. Once William Wallace was put into jail, he's like, you need to call the mom of that kid. She'll clear my name right now. So the police was like, okay, we call her. Let's call her up. And over the phone, she says exactly what William said. That's my kid. His name is Bruce. I said that William could take him on this trip. And she's backing him up completely. So now the police are like, we're in a little bit of a pickle. Now there's a mother claiming that this is my kid. But when the police start to follow up and question her a little bit more, like, why is your son with this traveling handyman? He's 4. Why isn't he with you? She starts to cover her tracks a little bit. Her personality's a little bit odd, and she starts defending herself personally, saying, well, I said that he could only take him for 2 or 3 days. This kid has been with William for a year. So the police are like, this is not adding up. You said this is your kid, and he was allowed to be with him, but now you're saying it's been over a year, but you said he can only go for 2 days. Where's the credibility here? In what world do you not report your kid missing when you tell somebody, yeah, you could take my son for 2 to 3 days on your handyman trip, and he leaves for a year? What mother doesn't call the police and say, hey, he's 362 days late? So you can only imagine that the police are not swayed even a little bit by this testimony from this so-called mother. So they call Mr. and Mrs. Dunbar down to the station to identify this kid that they found, that they think like, this is probably the kidnapped kid. Mr. and Mrs. Dunbar, please just come here and let us know if this is your kid so we could close this case. So when Miss Dunbar comes to the police station to identify this kid to see if it is actually her son that went missing, initially, the kid's just kind of crying in the situation, so he's just emotional in general, but you could take that in 2 ways. Maybe he's emotional because he's seeing his mom for the first time, or maybe he's emotional because this whole situation is super distressing. But Miss Dunbar, when she goes up to this kid and is checking him out, she's like, I'm not sure if this is my kid. She isn't positive when she sees him. She can't be sure. Yes, you could say it's been 8 months since she's seen her son. Like, yeah, you grow a lot in 8 months when from 4 to 5 years old. But is a mother really not sure if they see their kid? I'm not a mother, so I don't know. But all the mothers watching, would you not be absolutely sure if you saw your kid? But you have to remember that the police are actively trying to close this case. They aren't liking William Wallace or the mother attached to him, and they want to solve Mr. and Mrs. Dunbar's horrible tragedy. So they're like trying to give this lady opportunities to remember if this is her son. So she asked to bathe him just to see, because she knows kind of scars and moles that he has. And after bathing the kid, she goes, this is 100% my son. The moles and the scars match. This is my son. The police had heard enough. They're like, case closed. Mr. and Mrs. Dunbar, we've awarded you a child. The Dunbar family is now together and reunited. The community literally throws a homecoming party for the Dunbar family upon return. This was a massive event in their community, and they were celebrating finding this lost child. And for the first couple months, it's a sweet setup. This kid has a new family, a loving family that has missed him, and a community that is celebrating him and missing him. But a couple months later, the real mother, who is named Julia Anderson, who is the lady that was basically saying he's 363 days late, came forward to back up William, who's still in jail for kidnapping. So now this kid has been moved to a very happy, healthy household, and he's being celebrated and loved. And the lady that's saying that is my kid, like his mother, is going, no, come back to me, the person that didn't know where you were for 363 days, because that dude's in jail wrongfully for kidnapping. But this lady is just relentless, but relentless in a weird way. She shows up to the police department and says, I said that he could have him for 2 days. He took him for a year, but he isn't a kidnapper, so you should let him out. And that kid that the Dunbar family has is my son. So he's not a kidnapper, that's my son, but I'm the most irresponsible mom in the country. So let me just tell you a little bit about Julia so you know the type of person she is, so you know how actually weird this situation is. And most importantly, why the police and the community treated her and the situation the way that they did. So Julia did have a bit of a checkered past, but it was true that she worked for William Walter's parents. But unfortunately, she didn't carry the best reputation. Julia had accumulated 3 children from 2 different men, which at the time was very frowned upon. All these children were illegitimate and they were created out of wedlock. So when she came forward and said Bruce was her son, the police department looked at her past and weren't really happy with what they were seeing, because if you look at her past with her children, the first daughter that she had, she just put her up for adoption, and the second child that she had passed away suddenly, and there was an investigation into her to see if she actually had a part in that. So the police department didn't really care what she was saying, because she was just a liability to children at this point. And the police were like, you know, I don't believe you whatsoever, and if this kid isn't yours, it actually might be better off that you don't have it. So there was a couple things at play here. The public perception of her was really bad, and the police's perception of her was also really bad. But also, she didn't have money to fight this case. She didn't have money for lawyers. She didn't have money to fight the Dunbars for custody of this kid that she thinks is hers. So she just had to go back home. She just had to put her hands up and be like, okay, I guess the kid's yours, and just leave it alone. Which it didn't really seem like she cared about. I assume that she cared about getting William Walters out of jail because he was in jail for kidnapping that he didn't do in her eyes, but it didn't really seem like she wanted her son back that bad, considering she just let William Walters take him for a year, and she only came forward to say it was her son after he was in trouble for having it. So this case pretty much got closed, even though there was multiple witnesses that said William Walters had been with Bruce for months before Bobby Dunbar actually went missing. So there's people saying like, no, Williams had that kid for a long time. It doesn't add up. Like the timeline doesn't add up with the disappearance to the alleged kidnapping. But I guess nobody cared, so William ended up spending 2 years in jail for alleged kidnapping. So William was actually sentenced to life in prison for this, but there was a lot of technicalities in the case because clearly, as I've been explaining, it was very weird. And he filed an appeal and he actually got out after 2 years, which was an absolute blessing because Bobby Dunbar lived a beautiful life with the Dunbars. He just stayed with them. He stayed with that loving family and he grew all the way up and he married a girl at 18, found the love of his life. He lived a beautiful life and he even had no doubts about who he was, what his identity was. To himself, he was Bobby Dunbar. Something happened when he was a kid. His parents found him. He lived a beautiful life. He got a beautiful wife. Things were peachy for Bobby Dunbar. So Bobby Dunbar lived this beautiful life and eventually he passed away. But he had a bunch of beautiful kids and eventually his granddaughter took it upon herself to solve this case because now they had the technology for DNA tests. And she was like, wow, that was a really massive case that was surrounded by our family. She was fascinated by it. She wanted answers. She made her father get a DNA test to see if he was actually related to the Dunbars. And when the results came back, he wasn't even remotely related to the Dunbars. There was no chance that her grandfather, Bobby Dunbar, was actually the missing boy, Bobby Dunbar. He was 100% Bruce Anderson. He spent his entire life thinking that he was Bobby Dunbar. He even died thinking that he was Bobby Dunbar. But his granddaughter found out that he definitely wasn't Bobby Dunbar. And he spent his entire life living with a family that was not his family. And maybe it was the best situation for him because his mother Julia didn't really seem to care for him. And the guy that took him in was a traveling handyman. It's not the best role model to have. You're just you're 4 years old and you have to travel the country fixing pianos with this guy. I think when the young boy was presented with a loving mother and a loving family and a stable household, he was like, yeah, I am Bobby Dunbar. Unfortunately, the real Bobby Dunbar was never found. He most likely drowned in the lake or was kidnapped, something along those lines. But Bruce Anderson actually seemed to be saved by this situation. So this was a horrible tragedy, a really confusing case, but also a blessing for a young boy that was looking for a family. So this story starts with a family of 3, but I want to start with the parents first. The parents' names were James and Amy. They had happened to first meet each other at a party, and they see each other from across the room. They're liking what they're seeing. They approach each other, and they start hitting it off right away. They realize that they have some real chemistry from the moment that they met. And even though they met at this party and they were in the same spot for one night where they hit it off, they didn't live very close to each other. So they had to go about starting their relationship long distance. They knew that they liked each other, but they knew that they were going to have to get to know each other from miles apart. And that's not the most favorable way to start a relationship. I know some people are long distance, they absolutely love each other, they finally get to move in with each other and it's all peaches and cream. But most of the time, that isn't the most favorable way to start a healthy relationship. Not to mention, this was a rebound relationship for Amy. She had recently just got divorced and James was actually her first rebound fling. So not only were they long distance, they were starting their relationship piggybacking off a recent divorce, which again, isn't the most ideal scenario. And anybody that's been through a tough breakup, we all know how hard that could be emotionally for your everyday life. Just your regular demeanor as you wake up every morning, fresh after a broken up relationship, is always tough. Amy was really struggling with it. Not to mention, she actually had a history of already struggling with mental health issues. But Amy's struggle with these issues didn't deter James. James really liked her and he was like, this is my girl. We could all respect that. Through thick and thin, when you find your partner, you put up with the dark sides of their personality and you have to respect that. And they started building this long distance relationship that wasn't built on the best foundation and her mental health wasn't really in the best place. But James absolutely loved this woman and was determined to get her into a better place emotionally and mentally. And it worked. They stuck it out. They built on their long distance relationship. They built off of this recent divorce and he pushed through. They loved each other and they eventually got married. Apparently their relationship was pretty good at the beginning. It was pretty solid. Obviously they loved each other. They were overcoming obstacles together, but they did say that they did fight quite a bit. A lot of yelling, a lot of disagreements, just overall a lot of tension in the relationship. And as we can all relate to, their fights were mostly over finances. That's usually what all fights are about. That's where all the stress in the world comes from. People not being able to afford to live. Seems unfair that the average American can't really survive on how much the dollar's worth, but we're not going to get into that here. Their fights were primarily over finances, but other than that, everything was pretty good. And even though they had their issues, they ended up staying together, and eventually Amy got pregnant with their first kid. And it was a healthy pregnancy. She delivered a beautiful son named Timothy. And let me tell you, the best thing that ever happened to Amy was having this child. She loved Timothy with all of her heart, gave her real purpose in her life, and it was actually helping her overcome her mental health issues. She said that she was in the best place of her life when she had this beautiful newborn baby. She felt purpose, she felt meaning, and she felt overwhelming love for this child. She just loved being a mother. She loved Timothy more than anything in the world. So the relationship with her son was purely positive. It was uplifting her life. Everything on her personal side, her mental health, all that was on the rise. However, her relationship with her husband was on a steep decline. They were fighting all the time, and now not only just about finances, just fighting in general. So this relationship went from manageable to unbearable for both of them. It seemed like James bit off a little bit more than he could chew, and it didn't seem as if he really understood mental health at the level that he should have before making a commitment like that to somebody who struggles with it. Because everybody that struggles with mental health knows that there's not much control as you're going up and down. Over time, it corroded their relationship, and he got less patient with it, which just drove them further apart. It got to the point where Amy even started to threaten divorce and hold it over James' head. But she knew in her heart that it was probably best for Timothy for them to stay together. At least she wanted to try to make it work for her son's sake because she loved him so much. She wants him to have a loving mother and a loving father in his life. This is where it gets a little bit messy. Their relationship was already falling apart, and they were just going in separate directions. And Amy actually started talking to her first husband. And James found out that she secretly went to go meet up with him and that she had been communicating with him. And James wasn't cool with that. Obviously, James felt completely betrayed and outraged, and they started having much more real arguments and really started talking about divorce. And the main thing that James said was, if we get a divorce, I don't care if you go back with your husband. Be with who you want, but just know I get full custody of Timothy because I don't trust you and your ups and downs with your mental health. And you could only imagine the panic that Amy was feeling, because she knew that if this did go to trial, the judge would probably give him full custody because of her past issues with self-harm and mental health. He would probably get Timothy, and she'd have no access to him. And a reminder, Timothy is her only purpose for living at this point. And again, they tried their best to make the relationship work. Even after Amy stepped out of the relationship, tried to come together again for the sake of Timothy, but it just kept getting worse. And then it got really bad. One day, James dropped Timothy off at school, which he did very often. It was just a Wednesday morning. He dropped his son off at school and he went to work. But when James finished his shift and went back to Timothy's school to pick him up after his day of school, the teacher informed James that Timothy had actually been picked up earlier that day and he was barely in school today. And James looks at the teacher like, give me some more information. Who picked up my son today? And she said his mother picked him up. She just picked him up early in the day. She mentioned that there was a family emergency, and there was a little of an assumption that the dad should probably know about this family emergency, but he had no idea what was going on. And just to make it very clear, Amy picked up Timothy at 8:45 in the morning, only 1 hour after he was dropped off. So he's been out of school for like 6 hours at this point. So Timothy barely spent any time at school that day. And obviously the teachers assume that if there's a family emergency and the mother is picking up the son, the father is aware of it. But James had no idea. And now it's been like 6 hours since Amy has had Timothy, and he doesn't know where she is or where he is. And initially, James is like, okay, well, at least his mother picked him up, so I trust her. I know that she loves him. So he was just like, all right, I'm just gonna go home and I'm gonna talk to her, and whatever family emergency, maybe I'm gonna get filled in right now, and I'm just gonna go and find my wife and figure this out. But when he arrived home, there was no sign of anybody at his house. There was no sign of his wife, no sign of his son, and then he started to get a little bit concerned. So he's blowing up Amy's phone, just texts, calls, trying to get a hold of his wife, but she's just screening all of his calls, not answering anything, just deny, giving him no information, no indication of where she is or where his son is. So now James is freaking out. He drives over to Amy's job. He's like, yo, have you seen Amy? Can somebody tell me where she is? Can somebody tell me where my son is? And they're like, we haven't seen her either. So he's still just on this wild goose chase. Now all of the red flags are going off. There was a family emergency. She didn't mention it to him. She pulled Timothy out of school. She wasn't at work. They've been gone for hours at this point. They're not at home. He is panicking. So now James, his only option is to call Amy's parents and ask them, do you know where she is? He's just calling family. Has anybody seen Amy? Where is my wife and my son? He's trying to self-soothe. He's trying to talk to himself, give himself positive affirmations, make himself feel better about this situation. So he's thinking, maybe she was just mad at me. Maybe she just needs some space. Maybe if I'm patient, she'll call me. She'll tell me what was going on with them. Our relationship's been super rocky recently, so let me just calm down. Let me not jump to conclusions. I'm sure my wife and my son are okay. He's not particularly concerned about Timothy's safety because he knows how much Amy loves her son. He's not worried that she's gonna hurt him. In any world, he doesn't think that she could hurt him. But he is having these internal thoughts of like, this is really disrespectful to me as a father to not tell me what's going on, but he's just trying to calm those down just so he could get a hold of his wife and kid. So a couple hours go on and he's still just trying to call her. She is just deny, not trying to talk to him whatsoever. And he is kind of forced to file a missing persons report. If your child and wife are gone for more than 6 hours, that is just the right thing to do. So naturally, the police are aware of it and they're starting to look for Timothy and Amy, but they don't put out an Amber Alert immediately because he's with his mom. You guys have been having relationship issues. Maybe she just is staying at a friend's house or something like that. She ran away from you guys. Usually when we solve these, it's just the mother and the kid, and then it gets resolved and everybody moves back in together, and it was just a hump in a relationship. So they didn't put out the Amber Alert immediately. So a couple days pass, and you could just only imagine James is just thinking worst case scenario at this point. He's freaking out. He has no idea where his kid is, no idea where his wife is. Even if they've been fighting, you're still scared about that. You still love this woman at the bottom of your heart, even if you're considering divorce. That's the mother of your child. And then he gets a phone call. Amy called her parents and his brother. So she called her brother-in-law and just said, we're fine. And the parents didn't immediately call James and let him know because there was some confidential information in that phone call. But his brother-in-law is like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, don't tell James. Cool, very cool, that's my brother. Hey, James, I know where your wife and kid is. Well, he didn't exactly say, I know where they are. He just said, I know that they're safe. Because Amy said, we're just safe, but he also mentioned that Amy said, this kid's mine. No matter what, James is not having this kid. And she made that statement to his brother on that phone call. So it's been over 3 days since James has heard anything from Amy. He has only heard whispers through his brother and his in-laws. And then he gets a knock at the door. And it was the police, and they had some pretty dreadful looks on their faces, and they have to tell James that they've found his wife deceased at a hotel in Rockford, Illinois. This made absolutely no sense to James because they lived in Aurora, Illinois. This was over 2 hours away. Why was his wife 2 hours away in a random motel in Rockford? So the police informed James that this was a self-inflicted injury. Amy did this to herself. And even as devastating as that is, James wasn't particularly surprised. What she'd been battling over the years was an uphill battle. She was not winning. So he wasn't overly surprised that she had finally done it. And the police go on to tell him that when she was found, there was also a note found with her, and it basically said that she was sorry for the mess that she made in the motel room, but on top of that, she said, don't worry guys, Timothy's safe, but none of you will ever find him. But she ensured his safety, but she also said, he's nowhere to be found. I promise you guys won't find him. So as the cops are investigating the crime scene, obviously they're looking for details about what might have happened to Timothy. Like, they know what happened to Amy. They're trying to figure out what happened to Timothy, but they find a knife that was the weapon that was used for Amy, and there was no signs on that knife. There was none of Timothy's DNA on it. It definitely wasn't used for him. So obviously this crime scene is just filled with confusion. Nobody knows what's going on. So the police take a couple weeks and they start piecing together as much information as they could possibly find on what happened here. And this is what happened. They found out that after Amy had picked up Timothy from school, she immediately dropped her car off at an auto repair shop. And an employee of the auto repair shop drove her and Timothy to Brookfield Zoo while her car was being worked on. And after spending the entire day at the zoo, they went back to the repair shop and picked up her car. Seems very normal, a regular errand and a fun little trip for her and her son. From the auto shop, she drove Timothy to a water park because she knew that her son loved water parks, and they spent a fair amount of time there as well. And then after the water park, they drove north to the Key Lime Cove, which is just a nice, fun, family-friendly resort. So they're on this borderline staycation, and they stayed the night there. And then the next day, they drove up to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells. They're just on this absolute marathon of fun. And when the police were reviewing all of the security cam footage that they could find of Amy and Timothy at these resorts and these parks and these zoos, there was no indication that anything was wrong. they looked like they were having a blast. Timothy looked happy. He didn't look scared. He was having a fantastic time. And Amy looked pretty happy herself. And after their trip to the Kalahari, they drove up to Sterling, Illinois. And that's where she got a hold of her mom and James's brother. And then right after those phone calls, the next evidence that they could find of her was at a dollar store just picking up like pens, papers, and envelopes. Then she just went to a grocery store and grabbed a gallon of milk. But there was no surveillance footage of Timothy at the dollar store or at the grocery store. The last time they saw him was at the Kalahari. He wasn't in that surveillance footage, and that was actually the last time he was ever seen. So whatever plan Amy had must have been very well thought out, and she must have not told anybody about it because none of her family members knew any reason she would be in Rockford, Illinois. They didn't think that she had any friends there. There's no family there. There's no reason for her to be there. And on top of the staycation and their demeanor at the water parks looking like they're having so much fun, there was bank records that Amy had actually bought new toys and new clothes for Timothy just a couple days before this. So there's an indication that she had no plans of harming him. She had plans of taking him on a really fun trip, giving him a bunch of toys and clothes. Why would she buy him new stuff if she was planning on harming him? So then you start having these assumptions. Did she set up a illegal adoption? Did she give him to somebody? Or was this all just a beautiful last couple days before she harmed her own son? Now, there was a little detail that would indicate that maybe Timothy was harmed. They found a little bit of blood in the back seat of her car, but it was such a minute amount that people could just be like, that was just probably a nosebleed. This isn't a major wound. It's just like a little bit of DNA, not enough to say that she harmed him. But what else was weird about her car, not just this little splash of blood in here, it looked as if she had been driving through kind of rugged terrain. Inside her wheels, they found weeds that weren't cut weeds. They looked like they were driven over, and they were reminiscent of weeds that you would find by a pond. But they couldn't come to any conclusions about that pond or the weeds that were in her wheels. There was very inconclusive evidence that was going on here. Another thing that they found was her cell phone. They found it 2 years later, but she had completely wiped it because she covered all of her tracks and she wanted to make sure that Timothy was never found. But then in 2019, a lost kid was found. He was walking around looking abused, torn up, and just kind of deranged. And when a woman approached him to see if this kid was okay, he looks at her and goes, I just escaped from kidnappers. They kidnapped me 7 years ago. My name's Timothy. He was claiming to be their lost son. So obviously this lady calls the police and he did need medical attention. He was beaten up, he was bruised, he didn't look good. So now this kid is in the police custody and he's still like, I'm Timothy. But when he was brought to the hospital, he was refusing to do fingerprinting and blood work. And he's telling everybody at this hospital and all of these police officers, yeah, I'm Timothy. And my birthday is October 18th. And that was Timothy's birthday. He knew that. So this is getting weird. They're like, is this actually Timothy? But why is he refusing to do fingerprints and why is he refusing to do blood work? So that's when the FBI actually showed up and got involved because this was a very big case. And now 7 years later, somebody's claiming to be this kid that was never found. The FBI's like, yeah, we don't really care that you don't want to take a blood test. Go ahead and take that kid's blood so we could figure this out. And wouldn't you know it, the kid's not Timothy. And also, not a kid. 23-year-old man that was a felon that had just got out of jail and was just trying to say that he's Timothy to, I don't know, ruin a grieving father's life? I don't know. But he did serve 2 years in prison for this hoax. This was a whole media storm. This was a big issue. But James still does believe that Timothy's out there. He's waiting for the next call to say that they found Timothy or for Timothy to reach out to him personally. He believes that Timothy will eventually find him. So which one did you guys think were true and which one did you think was false? I'm going to give you 2 seconds. 1, 2. The first one was fake. The first one was the plot of the movie Prisoners. I thought that was an amazing movie. I felt like it fit with these true stories really well. I hope you guys enjoyed this segment. We have a very big story coming out later this week or maybe early next week. It's a 3-part Skinwalker Ranch series. We're going to be fitting in these fun games and tests and telling as many stories as we possibly can while making it as fun and entertaining for you guys as possible. Just know that we are working on the first-person point of views on the back end. They just take a little bit longer, but it doesn't sit right with me not giving you guys fun content in the intermediate. But no, we're working. We appreciate you watching these style of videos and engaging with them and guessing and having fun in the comments. But we know what you guys really want. We know you want the first persons, and we're going to do it. See you soon.